longer as Gentiles also walk, but in the futility of their mind, being darkened in their understanding, excluded from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them, because of the hardness of their heart. So Paul is shifting here, and he's moving to a whole nother aspect of this chapter, an aspect of drawing some very distinct characterizations between opposites here. There's a form of alliteration that was used in Old Testament times and obviously in New Testament times, contrasting opposites. Okay? Be this rather than this. We see in different verses, what fellowship have light with darkness, two opposites. Okay? And that's what Paul is doing here. And he's doing this because he wants them to walk in the way with the Lord. And he's talking about putting off, what you used to do as Gentiles and the futility of that walk. Now, he's not saying you Gentile Christians. He's talking as former Gentiles. So he's making a little distinction here of these things. Now, we all understand culture, and that's one of my biggest focuses when we look at the Bible, to understand the culture at the time. Understand the contrasts that are going on here. Now, if you were a Jewish person, in the first century church, you would understand moral absolutes. You would understand that there were 10 commandments. You would understand that there was commands to be a moral person, and you would have been brought up in that. You're teaching as a Jewish individual. Not necessarily so when it came to the Gentile church, especially in Asia Minor, in the Mediterranean, place that we're talking about, Ephesus and these other towns, Colossia and so forth. But what we're saying here is he's telling them, he's educating them on what they should and should not be doing. What is going to be helping them be better believers in Christ, and what is going to take them away from that. So we see here, it says, number one, you're not supposed to walk as you once did. There's supposed to be a transformation that comes over your body and your mind, and it should be something that's important to you because Christ has touched your heart, your soul, and brought you to him. Verse 18, being darkened with their understanding, excluded from the life of God because of their ignorance that is in them, because their hardness of their heart. Each and every one of us, before we have come to a saving knowledge of Christ, has had a hardened heart. Each and every one of us in today's day and age to back in the ancient days of history, if God didn't come into your life, if God didn't touch your heart, was there going to be a change in your life? There's always going to be this certain ignorance. There's always going to be this, as Paul says here in the New American Standard, that there's going to be this aspect of your life that is going to be not even looking to see who God is, not even understanding who God is, not caring who God is. So he's talking about that, and he's explaining this to us. And in verse 19, he goes a little bit further, because they have become callous, have given themselves over to sensuality for the practice of every kind of impurity with greediness. Now, if you break this down, you really look at the understanding of what Paul is saying here. You think it's bad today. You think it's bad in our culture today. The averse sensuality being pressed upon us in every aspect. Well, it wasn't really too much worse than that back then in the aspect of the culture of the Greeks. When I was doing my research, there was so many things I was kind of mortified by. I was very disappointed to see that this was fact and actual happenings in a time and a place. When Paul's talking about them being callous to this stuff, if you were a young man going into adulthood, your passage into adulthood in the Greek culture would be being molested by an older man. Sick. And this was accepted. A lot of times their form of worship had to do with temples that actual prostitutes, that was your form of worship. Okay? So we're not talking about a group of individuals that are going to see sexual immorality as a problem or a big deal. They probably didn't even see it as immorality because it was their form of worship. It was the form of what they did as human beings. He's talking to the Greek culture. He's talking to the culture that had been impressed upon this. That's the reason why, if you look back into history, the Jewish culture at this time was looked on as so odd and so strange because they didn't do all these other things. They didn't adhere to these accepted immoralities. And then, having become callous, they're oblivious to this. Calluses. If we think about calluses today, I think about guys and ladies that work with their hands. Okay, you do certain things and you get calluses. Unfortunately, I am not musically talented. Okay. But I have friends that play instruments, and you develop certain calluses, especially if you play guitar or something like that, from picking the strings and playing. You get calluses on your fingertips. If you do different kinds of work, if you're going to feel my hands, you would feel like calluses across the palm of my hand from doing different kinds of work with tools of ignorance, shovels, rakes, different things like